What's up guys? We just wrapped up EPL playoffs and honestly I did pretty decent. I got a top 22% finish and that was despite none of my teams making it past the semis, with ENCE falling to Maus. Max went positive, which is good. I was right about the Shuey call. Unfortunately I didn't pick into him, I went into Max because he was cheaper, but I don't super regret it just because I still ended up with a good result. Despite Vitality's fall off, the fact that I went to some Pious instead of the Nuts Snappy combo kind of put me a little bit ahead, and I think overall, pretty good result. I also did awful on rolls and boosters. I think if I'd done better in rolls and boosters and I gone Magisk instead of Flamesy, I probably would have ended up closer to the 10%, but regardless, a result that we're happy with considering so many people went into the pitfall picks and fell off. We take it. If we look at the celebrity leaderboard, which I've been avoiding showing you guys because I've been doing so badly lately, but I've jumped about 6-7 places. I think I was in like the mid 20s. I'm now number 16, 2 points off number 15. And I think with the amount of games left in the season, it's difficult for me to win it unless I get a lot of 1%ers. But I think I can end up, between 10 and 5 if I get some good consistent results. So that's kind of what we're aiming for here, because I think there's only like 8 or so events left, maybe, if that. But thankfully, thanks to Blast splitting things up, we get 2 events. Our last 2 events of the CSGO calendar. This video is going to be the Europe one. I'm going to do a different video for the rest of the world, which I think is just Americas now. That one is going to be a little bit shorter just because it's only going to be the drafts because I've already done the intro here. So yeah, keep an eye out for that one, but let's talk Europe. In terms of the bracket, it's single elimination, standard for the showdown. I think there's some pretty obvious favorites here. And I think when you're drafting, you're looking at a 2-2-1 split, obviously. 2 players from each side of the bracket that go to the grand final. So you get 4 players in the grand final. And then your 5th player you ideally want in the semis. So that's kind of the format to use for your drafting here. These are the results that I expect to happen. I think the favorite to win the event is most likely ENCE. I think they've got an easier pathway to the grand final. Plus, I'd say they're just the best team in terms of form at the moment of these teams. G2 is the second pick. I think that goes without saying. And most drafts are going to involve both those teams. I think Cloud9's a bit of an X factor here. I think a lot of people are putting very little stock in them, for understandably. Very bad EPL result. G8 wasn't great. They've been very up and down. A lot of their players you're expecting to be not doing great. But there's definitely a chance they can do something here, particularly because G2 doesn't always show up on, every game. And this is like an online, bit of a weird event. Definitely scope for a team like Cloud9 to upset. And I think the other one that I'm interested in is 9 Big. I think that Big are the favorites there with 9's form at the moment. And Big's been pretty exciting lately. They pushed ENCE to 3 maps and potentially could have upset ENCE in the EPL groups. So I think they're a team that can definitely get to that grand final. And if you're banking on upsets, they're one to be looking at, especially with really good prices. That's the things to consider when we jump into the drafts. This first draft is going to use that logic of the 2-2-1, going with the grand final with a player in semis, which means we're going to have to pick for ENCE, G2, and then Cloud9/Big. This isn't going to be the draft I use, but it's one I want to put forward because I think it's going to be the most common path that people want to go. For ENCE, you have to go Snappy. It's kind of just the way the draft goes. I think he's one of the best picks you can get. Considering Alliance is a pretty easy matchup, and I feel like Snappy is just a consistent player. Most people are going to go for the Snappy Nuts combo, and for me, it's going to be the same for this particular combo or this particular draft. It makes sense. He's a lot cheaper than Sun Pious, and I think for the 10k extra you get on D-Hub, he's worth it. You have to go Hooksy. This is the downfall of going for a G2 ENCE and then either Cloud9 or Big draft is you have to go Hooksy. It's the only way you can afford it without making serious weird drafts. So it kind of sucks, but it is what it is. At least if everyone else is doing it, it's not too bad. And for this draft, we pair with Hunter, and that's because we want to get Hobbit as our final player. Everyone on Big is too expensive. I think they start at 192. So it means that if you want to get one of those players, you have to swap out Hunter or swap out Nuts. And I think at that point, you kind of want the double gold considering you're going in on both Snappy and Hooksy. And for this, you're banking on Hobbit having a good performance. So I don't mind it, but it's a little too safe. It's 4 of the most picked players. Hunter's the only exception here. And I just don't think Hunter's worth that price point. So Not a draft I'm going to go for, but I think one that we'll see a lot of people doing. The draft that I'm going to go for is a little bit of a variation. So we'll start with ENCE. We'll grab Snappy, and I'm going to go Sunpius. This is the combo that has worked well for me in the past. I think Sunpius is a great choice and best player you can get on ENCE, and a good chance of him just farming everybody here. So I'm happy with that combo, plus the rolls are good. For G2, I'm going to pick Monacy. Now I know I spent a lot of money here, but I'm going to show you how I'm going to justify it. With Monacy and Sunpius, I feel like I've picked the two players that could potentially top this group in terms of performance. And, you know, the only ones that maybe could break that are ENCE and Nico, so I'm still kind of pretty close to those players. You could technically swap Sunpius for ENCE and Monacy for Nico for this draft, but I prefer the double AWPers. I feel like that's a bit more of a comfortable strategy. So I'm going to go those two. To enable it, I'm going to go Hobbit. Hobbit's my pick over Hooksy. The reason for this is I know that Hobbit's performance hasn't been great, but for 6k more, I feel like Hobbit can get more done in those 2 best of 3s that they'll play if he does well, versus what Hooksy can do across the entire event of 3 best of 3s, right? I feel like Hooksy's going to end up a lot worse rated than Hobbit will. And so that's the idea here. Despite Hobbit probably getting eliminated, I feel like he's going to do a lot better than Hooksy. And I'm banking on that because I'm picking Minio. And this one's maybe the worst part of the draft is the Minio pick. So we're just hoping that the rest of the team lifts it up. Plus it's not a 2-2-1, so it's a little bit scattershot. But I'm kind of banking on upsets happening and hoping that I'm covering my bases enough here that it'll do the job. So this is going to be the Cannonballers. I think the draft is pretty decent. The roles work really well. And this is the one I'm going to actually run for this event at the moment. But I have another one up my sleeve as per usual. I've always got a bit of a crazy draft I can throw at you. This is the proper leaning into the upsets draft. So for this one, we're not looking at ENCE, we're not looking at G2, we're starting with a bit of Cloud9. We're going to grab the best 2 rated players from Cloud9, Shiro and Perfecto. Axel's actually really cheap at the moment, 210, but Axel's very volatile and I'm not sure I'd want to touch him. We're going to go to Big then, and Big are very reasonably priced. You got 3 players that are basically the same price. Process has been a pick that I really encourage. He's got really good activation headshot machine, and he can have pop-off games, which if Big are gonna do the upset, he'll have a pop-off game. We're gonna get Crimbo. He's the best rated player on this team. 208k, a little bit costly, but this is a pretty solid 4 players, right? I feel like we've got a lot of strength here, a lot of capabilities, and unfortunately we have to round it out with Nexa. This is a little bit zany, a little bit crazy. He's one of the cheapest players you can pick in this event. I think he might actually be the cheapest outside of Minio. But Nexa's actually pretty good, right? Like, we know this guy can frag, and I don't put a lot of stock in OG. Think the team's pretty mid, but I feel like Nexa can put on a good enough performance and he can kind of like be the max of this draft, right? He's just there to enable these rest of these purchases, and with the firepower we've got here, I think it will offset any cost that will come from OG losing to G2. So this would be my alternative draft, and again, very good role activation on most of these, so I feel like this has got some potential, but very scary to draft into, all things considered, but one that I'm definitely thinking about. So let me know what you think of my drafts. Let me know what you're doing. I really want to know if anyone's found any alternative ways to go about this, because it feels very restrained. It feels a lot like the EPL groups where you needed to pick into the favorites, but who knows? There's chances for upset. Big are definitely a team that I think has the most upset potential here because they've almost beat ENCE before. It's online. There's a chance. Let me know what you think, and I will see you in NA.